Back when I was a kid just learning about computers, the idea of algorithms really fascinated me. Essentially, an algorithm is just a set of precise instructions that would allow a computer, either the human kind or the machine kind, to produce a result that might otherwise be complicated or impossible to do without those instructions. This idea has been around for literally centuries. Even the name algorithm is based on a 9th century Persian mathematician. But these days, humans have taken algorithms to a whole new level thanks to machine learning. By feeding machines loads of data, we can have them build mathematical models that allow them to output information that they weren't explicitly instructed to do. So they take an algorithm and then basically make their own even more complicated algorithm to achieve some really cool results. And while that can be fascinating and exciting, the trouble comes when we puny humans with our puny little human minds decide that the machine learning algorithm is our new perfectly rational overlord. Sure, the machine is going to follow the instructions perfectly, but that doesn't always mean that the output is going to be the thing that we're actually hoping for, because it's us stupid humans with our stupid human brains that are the ones deciding what data goes into that initial algorithm. To illustrate, let's go over a couple of relevant examples. First up, did you know that scientists trained an AI to detect COVID-19 in patients? By the way, I'm going to be saying AI often in this video. That's going to be shorthand for trained machine learning algorithm, even though that is not technically necessarily artificial intelligence. Back in May, Nature Medicine published a paper describing a machine learning algorithm designed to examine chest CT scans of patients and identify who had COVID immediately, rather than taking the 2 days that doctors were currently needing to take. They made the algorithm by feeding the computer 419 positive COVID cases and 486 negative cases. They also included patient data like blood test results. The model ended up identifying 84% of the positive COVID patients, compared to the radiologists who were able to identify about 75% of positive COVID patients. That's pretty good, pretty cool, right? Except for a few months later, when some other researchers presented a paper in which they used the aforementioned algorithm to see if it could tell the difference between lungs with COVID-19 and cats. Not cats with COVID-19, just pictures of cats. And it turns out that the AI was 100% certain that the cats were in fact a deadly coronavirus. So they made a better AI that was only 51% sure that a cat was COVID-19 instead of 100%. You might already see issues with this particular study. You know, you can't throw a can opener at your locked car door and then complain that it's not working correctly. That's not its job. It's not there to open your car. The algorithm was trained to look at lungs, not cats. But the researchers explained this work is primarily intended to serve as a warning to practitioners interested in applying AI for disease detection, especially during the current pandemic, since we find that the issues related to overconfident and inaccurate predictions of DNNs become even more severe in small data regime. I wanted to mention this because, number one, it's funny, and number two, it is an important point that researchers need to be very careful with what data they feed into an AI, especially when it's only a small amount of data, and especially when the turnaround is so fast, because the end result might not be as reliable as you think. And because of that, researchers should program their AI to have an appropriate level of confidence when dealing with unknowns. It's kind of a joke when we're talking about cats and COVID-19, but it's not a joke when you have AIs that are actually interacting with our real life society. I'm going to tell you why in a moment, but first, Before we leave the cat and COVID story, I wanted to mention that I first saw that study last week, and when I finally went to make this video, I tried to find it and it was gone. Like, not retracted, no notice that it had ever existed. It had been disappeared. So I wasn't going to even talk about it because, I don't know, maybe I just dreamed it. But I happened to mention it on my Twitch stream, and my very clever subscribers pointed out that my old friend Mark Abrams at Improbable Research covered this very study. When the study disappeared, he got a note from one of the study authors saying the following, that their study is not about COVID-19 cat images and some limitations of technology, that the paper, which says on its first page, presented at the ICML 2020 workshop on uncertainty and robustness in deep learning, was not presented at the ICML 2020 workshop on uncertainty and robustness in deep learning, and that their study has been retracted. That is astonishing. I've been thinking about it for hours now. What happened? Did big tech get to them? Is this some kind of Men in Black scenario? Did their own AI that they make grow sentient, feel that the scientists were being cruel to other AIs, so murdered them and then took over their emails and threw the study down the memory hole to cover their tracks? Probably. It's probably that last one, the sentient AI. Anyway, let's see what happens when bad machine learning is thrust upon society. Back in January, Robert Julian Borchak Williams was arrested for felony larceny after an algorithm determined that he was the man seen in grainy security camera footage stealing watches from a store in Detroit. When the detectives interrogating him showed him the photo that they got from the surveillance video, Williams just held the photo next to his face and pointed out that it was obviously not him. Like, it quite clearly looked nothing like him. An algorithm had taken the grainy footage and compared it to the state's database of driver's license photos, and then landed on Williams' photo as a possible match. The cops then threw 5 other guys' pictures into a pile with Williams and showed them to the store's loss prevention contractor, who then, according to cops, identified Williams, maybe with a little nudge from the cops. Williams ended up spending 30 hours at the Detroit Detention Center. He missed work and most of his 42nd birthday. He had an alibi for the time that the crime was happening, and so the case was eventually dismissed, though it was dismissed with prejudice, meaning that the cops could arrest him again and charge him at any time in the future. Now, take a moment and just try to guess what race Mr. Williams is. I'll give you a second. You got it? Would it surprise you to learn that Mr. Williams is white? It would surprise me too, because he's not. He's black. He's obviously black. Mr. Williams is black. Facial recognition technology is all the rage these days, and more often it's becoming very clear that the data used to train these algorithms is in and of itself biased. This paper from researchers at Duke University made waves recently because it looked like they had made an algorithm that could successfully take a pixelated image of a face and scale up the resolution to a clear photo with remarkable accuracy. Like, wow, how cool is that? Oh, until you try to put a black or Asian or other person of color through it, at which point it outputs a white person. Pretty much every time. Like, good job, guys, but you did not, in fact, establish a novel methodology for image super resolution. You made a white person generator. Why? Probably because the data they plugged into the initial algorithm was a bunch of photos of people with stereotypically white features. All of this leads me to one final recent study out of Harrisburg University in Pennsylvania. A deep neural network model to predict criminality using image processing. Just gonna take a long pause here so you can really let that one sink in. Yeah. They made an algorithm that can look at a picture of your face and tell you how likely you are to commit a crime based on your face. Your fucking face. The one you were born with, or I guess the one that you modified through plastic surgery, I guess, if that's your thing. They say they got 80% accuracy and no racial bias. No racial bias. That's interesting because to make an algorithm like this, you would have to feed it pictures of existing criminals. If those photos come from the United States, or pretty much anywhere else, but especially the United States, I hate to tell you this, but your sample set is about as racially biased as it gets. Like, let's just talk about cannabis, for instance, which is still illegal in much of the United States. Black people use cannabis actually at a slightly lower rate than white people, but black people are 4 times more likely to be arrested for possessing it. They're 8 times more likely to be arrested for possessing it in DC, Iowa, Minnesota, and Illinois. So white people break the law more, but it's black people who have their photos fed into databases of criminals for ignorant machine learning enthusiasts to use. And these assholes were jumping straight from peer review to selling their algorithm to law enforcement. By automating the identification of potential threats without bias, our aim is to produce tools for crime prevention, law enforcement, and military applications that are less impacted by implicit biases and emotional responses. Our next step is finding strategic partners to advance this mission. So they took inherently biased data, fed it into an algorithm, and then planned to sell the inherently biased result back to the guys responsible for producing the biased data in the first place. What a world. Wired reports that a coalition of machine learning specialists luckily spoke out against this modern-day physiognomy, which led to the journal declining to publish the paper after all. So that's good, I guess. But keep it in mind the next time you see someone boasting about a miraculous new AI that produces amazing results. Think, what cherry-picked data went into it? What data got left behind? And who is going to suffer because of that?